Okay, let's keep going with the personality approach. So, as you've just seen, one of the reasons that a personality approach emerged is because of what's called generalized prejudice, that people who had negative attitudes towards one minority group, one out group, were likely to have negative attitudes to many. As a function of this sort of personality explanation, there was work that started to try and identify and understand a prejudiced versus tolerant personality. And researchers studying individuals and their relationships within the family generated something called authoritarianism and characteristics that define authoritarianism. They thought that they could measure these characteristics using something called the F scale, which stood for the fascism scale. And the theory that is developed in the nature of the research is very psychodynamic, very Freudian in its approach, sharing some connections to the psychodynamic perspective. So these characteristics were seen to develop from a person's relationship with a domineering father and a punitive mother. The argument goes that as an adult, the person then transfers the hostility felt towards their mother and father onto those groups seen as inferior to their own. So we see a little bit of the aggression, frustration within this authoritarianism approach. So these are some of the characteristics: that people have a rigid adherence to conventional values. They submit and identify strongly with authority. They don't show much, they don't like sensitivity or being sort of tender to others. They tend to be quite hostile. They tend to be superstitious in the way they think about and explain events around them. And they tend to use stereotype thinking and to see the world in very black and white terms. We can also see some of the explanations for the development of authoritarianism and this prejudiced personality. It results from punitive and parenting kind of styles early in life. It's associated with people feeling insecure and fearful. They can't cope with conflicts, inner tensions and conflicts, and they don't cope very well with uncertainty or change, or situations that aren't very clear-cut, that are have ambiguity about them. In contrast, we can see the tolerant personality. It comes from a permissive parenting and people being accepted for whatever type of attitudes and behaviours they hold. It's associated with feeling more secure, being more mature, and some sort of inner confidence for being able to deal with threat and uncertainty and these sort of fearful situations. So people feel much more able to cope. So this body of work was very influential in the 1950s moving forward. There's a lot of work that was done to try and measure both a prejudiced and a tolerant personality. In time, issues emerged with the nature of measurement. People felt that the F scale that was developed had a range of problems that meant that it didn't really measure prejudiced personality in the right way. And so the work sort of fell away, and less work was focused on the prejudiced personality. But in the 1980s, the work was really revived by someone by the name of Altemeyer, who did a lot of work to try and refine the measurement of authoritarianism and to come up with, I guess, a more modern measure of the authoritarian personality. And Altmaier refers to this as right-wing authoritarianism and develops a much better measurement tool for assessing this personality dimension. Altmaier focuses on three aspects of this authoritarian personality. And again, this personality is seen to be, people's responses on this personality measure are highly correlated with expressions of prejudice. So the first dimension is authoritarian submission. So people follow, I guess, legitimate authority. They show aggression towards various groups, if encouraged to do so by the social and political activities of the day. And there's a strong adherence to conventionalism, to, one might think, old-fashioned values and social conventions, which are endorsed by society or the established authority. So in the United States of America, where much of this research is developed, that conventionalism relates to some religious type values and, I guess, moral, social conventions in the way that it's examined and measured. So I wanted to show you some of the items of right-wing authoritarianism. So this is a scale that is currently used in research. People would quite often measure people's level of authoritarianism and also their level of prejudice. And it's measured on a -4 to +4 scale. And people are asked to go through and give a response to each of these questions. The ones that are in red I've highlighted because they have sort of more religious, Christian and religious overtones. So let's look at some of these items. One reason we have so many troublemakers in our society nowadays is that parents and other authorities have forgotten that good old-fashioned physical punishment is still one of the best ways to make people behave properly. The way things are going in this country, it's going to take a lot of strong medicine to straighten out the troublemakers, criminals and perverts. The real key to a good life are obedience, discipline and sticking to the straight and narrow. We also have sort of this moral kind of element. There's nothing wrong with premarital sexual intercourse. If we go and look at the next series of slides, we can see some other items. Our country will be great if we honour the ways of our forefathers, do what the authorities tell us to do and get rid of the rotten apples who are ruining everything. But you can go through and have a look at all of the different items and each item is trying to capture one of those three dimensions that we discussed before: submission, aggression, or conventionalism. And this measurement has been shown to be reliable and valid and to be related to the constructs that it's designed to measure. So authoritarianism work, this personality account of why we're prejudiced is very current within social psychology at the moment. I thought I might show you what a prejudice scale might look like. So we've done some work where we'd measure people's levels of right-wing authoritarianism, and we'd also measure their prejudice towards Aboriginal Indigenous Australians. And this is a version of the modern racism scale. And you can see the kind of questions that participants would answer. So some of them are reverse items, like it's easy to understand the anger of Aboriginal people in Australia. Others are not reversed, like Aboriginals are getting too demanding in their push for land rights. Over the last few years, Aborigines have got more economically than they deserve. And it's possible to show that people's responses on right-wing authoritarianism are in fact highly correlated with this with this measure of prejudice. There's another sort of personality variable that is used to help account for prejudice in the current work, and this is the social dominance orientation scale. And this is all about the degree to which you accept, excuse me, the degree to which you accept that there is going to be differences in groups within society, that some groups are going to be superior and get more, and some groups are going to be inferior and get less. And the social dominance scale captures those elements. Sometimes other groups must be kept in their place. It would be good if groups could be equal. That's a reverse item. Group equality should be our ideal, a reverse item. All groups should be given an equal chance, reverse item. We would have fewer problems if we treated people more equally. We've also got ideas like some groups of people are simply inferior to other groups. To get ahead in life, it is sometimes necessary to step on other groups. So you can kind of get a sense of the acceptance or not of there being a hierarchy where some groups have more power than others. So they're two sort of personality measures of prejudice: right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation. And you've also seen a measure of prejudice. And I guess the only other point to talk about in terms of the personality account or theory of prejudice is some of the debate about whether these are in fact measures of personality, or are they measures of social attitudes? And I guess given what we learned in lecture 1, we could also ask whether right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation are weird. Are these dimensions that would be easy to translate cross-culturally? How would these constructs and scales translate to a Chinese context? Would they make sense? Do we think that if we measured these beliefs, say in China or a non-Western country, would we get the same kind of results as when we measure them in places such as America? So I'm going to leave you to think about that, and we will come back and talk about some of the critiques of this approach.